When you have 500 people making the decisions for 300 million people across the entire, United States, there's cultures that are affected in way different ways. Bitcoin allows individuals to not only protect their livelihood and their energy, but at the end of the day, they're able to protect their culture. Everybody gets to keep their culture without having to go to war with each other. The other people want to do what they want to do, live and let live. Let them do what they want to do. But right now you're forced.
Russia found out the hard way that they could just lose all their money at one time. But when I can hold my wealth in a way they can't just confiscate and steal at the click of a button, then it changes the balance of power. And when it changes the balance of power, then what starts to happen?
I like to literally think of Bitcoin as a weapon, as like the perfect weapon for humanity. Because if you think in military tactics, these people are going to come and kill you. They're going to come and steal all of your energy. But there is this technology over here that you as the individual can pick up, store your own wealth, self-custodial Bitcoin, and you can just opt out. You can still continue to watch your football, drink beers, but you can literally arm yourself as a digital citizen, as a digital sovereign in cyberspace, to where you no longer allow that enemy to continually exploit you.
If you're following politics and the election cycle, you better realize right now that no one is coming to save you. Doesn't really matter who gets into the White House or wins the election, doesn't matter what country you're in. If you want to bring your life forward, you have to focus on your own wealth, your own finances, and your own future. And so I'm gonna sit down today, I'm talking with GMONEY, Garrett from Rugpull Radio, and we're gonna talk about a peaceful revolution that's happening that we can take part of to protect ourselves and build wealth into the future. We're gonna go through a couple of different frameworks that you can use that's going to move your life forward in the fastest amount of time possible. So let's just go ahead and just jump right in with Garrett. All right, Garrett, GMONEY. This has been an interview, long time coming. For everyone that doesn't know, what's kind of interesting is Garrett and I have been friends for a long time, well before Bitcoin.
Well before Bitcoin.
Which is pretty interesting. And now Bitcoin sort of kind of brought us back together, paths crossing. It's kind of cool. We are recording this on 10/31, before the election. We're not going to get into that stuff, but 10/31. And I want to talk about your thesis on digital 1776. And something I talk a lot about is like cycles and revolutions. And obviously that's a revolutionary year, 250 years ago. Fifth generation warfare, which I've done videos about, how to understand what's going on and use that to our advantage and protect ourselves. Counterinsurgency, what that means. Soft war, numerology, there's a bunch of stuff that we can do. But typically, or overall, what I want to say is just how can we understand the world, what's going on? Think about technology, which is always what changes the world, and think about protecting ourselves and thriving even through this. But I do want to just say, as of today, 10/31, we were talking about the significance of that date, which is when Martin Luther nailed the 95 Theses to the church door about 500 years ago. And that led to a revolution, and it was because technology, the printing press, had created the Bible. So the technology created information, and the information broke the grip of power that a central monopoly, the church at the time, had. And even though the church labeled people heretics and heresy and they killed them, you can't stop a good idea whose time has come. And here we are 500 years later, and on Bitcoin White Paper Day, which was introduced the same time as that 95 Thesis, we see the same thing. So this grip of these central power brokers, if you will, the central bankers and the governments have this grip over money. But we have new technology that's now decentralized that, distributed that, and no matter how hard they try to kill people, if they find it with it, hopefully it doesn't get to that, but there's just no way that they can stop that. That's what history shows us. But I talk about these cycles, these 250-year political revolution cycles. So about every 250 years, we have this big cycle. So 250 years ago was the American Revolution and the French Revolution at the same time, 1776. So let's talk about that, digital 1776.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Super excited to be here, and yeah, we had some fun back before the Bitcoin days, and it's kind of funny how it brought us together, being almost neighborly in that effect. And so, getting back to revolution, getting back to this 250-year cycles, what is digital 1776, right? What is our current form of abstract laws that we live in? Okay, and I think I like to break it down very simply so people can understand it and how we break through this system, right? And so let's just take the premise that banks control governments and then governments control people, okay? And I think that's a really simple baseline for people to understand, because we know, right, our politicians, to pass a bill, right, to get them to actually vote for a bill, what do, right? oh, well, let me put in something that's for my district or for my district, right? And so what you get is you just get this employees of the central bank, right, that are basically doing the bidding of, shadow government, these people that are behind the scenes. And so I think a couple years ago, you could have said, oh, gee, I don't know about this shadow government, these people behind the scenes pulling levers of power. But I think, what happened with the pandemic and everything else, I think people are a little bit more awakened to the corruptness of our institutions, right? Of our politicians, of big pharma, of the military industrial complex, right? You've got all these different things out there. And so we're still stuck in this system, right? We're still stuck in bad software, right? And so the government we have now is literally bad software, because in 1933, they froze the number of congressmen that allowed them to represent us. And so what do we get as the population grows? We get a dilution of our representation. And so we're like stuck in bad software. We're stuck in proof of stake software, where stakeholders, right, the actual politicians, the congressmen, senators, and president, are the stakeholders that make changes to our network. They're the ones that can say, hey, guess what? We're gonna give you 25% unrealized gains. There's nothing you can do about it. And so we have to really break it down. What system are we living in, and what's our solution out of this tyranny? Because we're paying more than 50% of our energy in taxes through inflation and taxation. And inflation at its base level is taxation without representation. Okay, taxation without representation is illegal. It's repugnant to a free and open American society that we've built upon freedom and representation, representative government. And so our democracy is a shitcoin in its current form. Yeah. Right. Our democracy is literally it's out of touch, and it needs to be upgraded to the 21st century. Okay. And so here we are. We're gifted with this beautiful gift from Satoshi Nakamoto, whoever that entity or people is.
Before we jump into that, let's talk back about the current form of government that we have. Yeah. We'll talk about solutions and ways we can protect ourselves and get ahead in this. I do just want to say for everybody, I think it's very important to understand the problems, the attack vectors, as I call them, so you can understand the solutions. Like if I understand someone's going to attack me through the front door, I'm going to barricade the front door and make sure I have a back door to get out of. And so these are not like doom and gloom, but this is like things that are going on. But in regards to that, something I've talked quite a bit about, which is that the current form of government that we have today, that you were just laying out, is no longer compatible with the world that we live in. And so you sort of talk about like the government, the form of government that we have today sort of being created and frozen in time, and maybe intentionally to sort of hold us down or keep us trapped in this system, if you will. I talk about it in a sense where technology changes the world, and on a 250-year time frame, we moved from like centralization to decentralization. So about 250 years ago was the American French Revolution, but it was also the Industrial Revolution. So it was the first time we really had mechanized machines, and we went from like a farm agrarian society now to like moving to cities and factories. Henry Ford in 1908 created the assembly line, and on the assembly line, everybody was equal.
Right.
So that's what I believe. Everyone says that we hollowed out the middle class by sending jobs to China. I don't really believe that's exactly the case. Those are low-paying jobs. We can just put people into the fields picking strawberries as well. What happened is on the assembly line, smart people and dumb people were equal. So we had this massive middle class because all these people did the same thing, just put the widget on the line. But what happened is, in order to manage the mass production and the masses, we had to come up with a management structure to manage people like numbers on a spreadsheet, cogs in a wheel. So then we had mass manufacturing, mass management, and then we created this mass government to govern the mass management of the mass production. Right. But what happened is we left the industrial age, and now we're in the information age. So we no longer have these big corporations or big factories. We no longer have those big assembly lines. And so now we have small decentralized companies. I have people working from a laptop anywhere in the world, so to speak. No longer do we have these 5, 10,000, 50,000 person corporations. There's just a few of them out there. But even still, their workforce is decentralized. And so now we have this small workforce, internet warriors, et cetera, all over the place. But we still have the government that was set up to manage mass management, mass production. And I see like technology has advanced to the point that we don't need that big giant government anymore. I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, you're right. The gig economy, where people can just be little independent, decentralized little economies of their own, and they can go off and do whatever they want. And so, we're stuck in that software path, right? We're stuck in an old system where it doesn't scale. It doesn't scale, right?
So it's like the banks are like, I heard the banks are still running Cobalt as like a software that they set up in the 70s, and they haven't started using new software. So the government is running the old software. That's sort of the frame that you're coming from.
Well, yeah, the framework of the idea of the current government we live in, 435 congressmen, 100 senators, right? That's just an abstract concept that someone put on a piece of paper. Right. And so who says we can't change that at some point, right? Now, obviously, I think there's very important facts of our Constitution, right? We've got Bill of Rights, we've got freedoms that other countries don't have. And so Bitcoin, in its purest form, is like a super constitution, right? First Amendment, Second Amendment, all these different amendments are built in digitally, and it's protected from a wall of energy. So it's like, how do we transition from this old, rotted out Cobalt banking software to like the 21st century Space Force and lasers and all types of different energies? What's that transition look like? And I believe we're in that transition, and Bitcoin is that bridge that gets us from the old to the new, to where we don't have to trust politicians to enact things that are dearest to our communities and our culture. Because what happens is when you have 500 people making the decisions for 300 million people across the entire United States, there's cultures that are affected in way different ways, in each sector of those things. And so Bitcoin allows individuals to not only protect their livelihood and their energy, but at the end of the day, they're able to protect their culture. And, I think culture is one of the most important facts of this, is that everybody gets to keep their culture without having to go to war with each other and cause this big uprising of a bloody revolution, right? This is a peaceful revolution. And that's why we call it digital 1776, because individuals are empowered at the most basic level, the economic level. And so what Bitcoin does, it transfers power, right, from an old, archaic, corrupt system into the hands of the individual, right? Power back to the people. Because, voting for, who's ever going to be president next isn't just going to be like, here's your freedoms back, right? Like, when does that ever happen? It's never happened. And so, no, I think you're right. I think, Bitcoin actually helps lead us into where governments just become service providers, right? They become water, power, internet at the end of the day. Yeah. And then you choose, right, voluntarily, which pack do you want to be a part of? Do you want to be a part of that has purple hair and forced, injections? Or do you want to be over here where they eat meat and they, they work out every morning?
I'll take the eat meat and the sun.
You get to choose the culture you want to be part of. And if the other people want to do what they want to do, live and let live. Let them do what they want to do. But right now you're forced. You're forced into playing a set of rules that are frankly against natural law. They're against the laws of harmonics with the universe, I believe, because they're forcing things upon people that are unjust, right? That are unfair. Over 50% taxation. Let's start there, right? And I think that's a fact that everybody can agree with. Doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on. That is strictly, a complete. That's theft at its very basic level.
So you talk about like this old system and how we can have this digital 1776. We can sort of have this revolutionary moment without bloodshed, which obviously sounds great, a peaceful revolution. But when I think about it, you're talking about being able to protect my property, so my money. But like, how does that change everything? By changing like incentives or shifting balance of power? The state has a monopoly on violence. So being able to hold my money isn't going to protect me from a monopoly of violence, is it?
Well, I think we need to learn how do we settle disputes, okay? Like traditional ways, me and you get in a fight or something, right? Like, oh, this is my piece of land, this is your piece of land. We go to war, we beat each other up, right? And we're like, okay, whoever is left alive takes the other person's land.
Right.
That's traditionally how we've settled disputes, right? And so now we're in a way to, where do we settle disputes? Well, we have to go to a court of law, right? That we have to then trust that judge isn't corrupt, right? Like any other type of litigation you get in, you have to then trust another, centralized, abstract center of law that you have to basically like, okay, can I trust these people? You're always extending that level of trust, okay? Me and you make a handshake deal, right? On, hey, this thing's worth this amount of money. We're going to split the profits of it. But if we don't have a way to protect ourselves and the thing all of a sudden becomes very valuable, you're like, you know what? Later, I'm just going to take off with it. And there's no recourse at that point. And so what do we have? We have a technology to where individuals, if they're unhappy with the current ways things are going, they can literally just opt out, right? And so let's take an example of 25% unrealized gains. Okay, Kamala comes down, Trump comes down, whoever it is, right? And says, hey, we're going to give you a bill. Your Bitcoin went up to $500,000. we see that you have this much, and we're going to tax you 25%,
right,
without selling it. And you can be, well, look, I'm not gonna obey. I'm not going to actually comply with your theft of my energy for no other reason than the fact that you have this rank and file system, and you have some kind of a special, gown or badge or hat that says you have special powers over me. And so what you can do is you can literally just opt out, and you can say, no, I'm not going to do that. And you can self-custody your Bitcoin. You can walk, you can take off to another country if you have to. But if you keep pulling this thread, okay, lots of people out there over the last, 5 to 10 to 20 years have slowly been seeing this acceleration of theft of their property, of their energy, to where they're no longer like going to accept it, right? There's a red line, I think, for a lot of people. And so if we keep understanding, hey, how do we break through the system? What happened in 1776, right? They negotiated, they pleaded, they did everything they could to avoid conflict with the king. But at the end of the day, right, they had to pull their muskets out. They actually had to use force, right, to overcome this abstract power. And so Bitcoin allows us to use force, right, actual power to settle our disputes and say, you know what, we're not going to agree to those terms. So I'm going to maybe move to El Salvador. I'm going to maybe move to somewhere else that's more friendly for my energy. And I can just pick up my energy and take off wherever I want.
Right.
And so what's going to happen is, at the end of the day, we as a collective, enough of us, can basically DDoS attack their enforcement bureaucracy. Okay, because if enough of us say, hey, we're no longer playing or abiding by your abstract rules that you just continually make up whenever you want. We're not going to file our federal tax returns. We're not going to comply with your unrealized taxable gains. They simply don't have enough people to imprison all of us, right? And so what was 1776? A small minority stood up against, the tyrants, and, the small toxic minority will change and will force the rest of the sheep to actually come over to their side. Now, not everybody's going to want to hear this type of stuff, but we don't need everybody, right? We only need enough people that reaches that critical mass of their enforcement arm, if they even have an enforcement arm, to actually go after all these individuals that have refused to, pay the king's tax, right? And I think, a lot of people talk about it. Saylor talks about, if you push me hard enough, like, I've lost my keys. We talk about boating accidents. And so there's already this quasi narrative going around. And even recently, Trump has been talking about no taxation. He started with no tax on tips. Then it went to no tax on Social Security. Then it went to no tax on overtime. And now he's like, hey, no federal income tax. And so I think what he's doing is he's slowly building a narrative that's shifting our Overton window and to be like, no, we have to pay tax. Tax is patriotic. When at the end of the day, your tax money doesn't actually go to any public service good at all. If you look up the Grace Commission report, Executive Order 12369, Ronald Reagan found in 1982 that 100% of your tax dollars go for no public good whatsoever. It actually, most of it goes to pay interest on the debt. And so if you think about that, we're actually all wage slaves, and we're stuck in a proof of stake network that is not going to allow us to actually get out of it by compliance, right? And so non-compliance in a parallel economy that allows us to protect our energy in a non-kinetic way is, I believe, the way that we win this war. Because, look, I think we've seen the corruption at pretty high levels over the last couple of years, and it doesn't look like they're going to let go of that power. It doesn't look like they're going to let go of that grip. Every year it's something new. They change the rules constantly. We live here in California. Every year Gavin Newsom's coming up with something new. Yeah. And so what does the end of it look like? I don't know. I just know that there's one solution out of this, and that is a peaceful, non-kinetic revolution where individuals can secure their energy behind a wall of energy that the government can't confiscate, they can't block, and they can't take from you.
So for the audience, we're referring to your energy as your wealth. So if you think about all your wealth as energy, and really time is wealth, time is money, money is time, kind of a thing. I expend energy working, and I get paid back money, and I store that money, which is storing my energy that I had used, and then I can store that for later. In regards to this, I think about the sovereign individual thesis, right? It's a little bit different than what you're proposing, and it's more based upon competition. and game theory than just outright non-compliance and revolution, right? Where it's like you mentioned, like go to El Salvador, for example. So we see El Salvador. We've seen Russia do this. People trolled me online when I mentioned Russia, but it's not about Russia. It's about the trend where we're starting to see nations starting to compete for citizens. So El Salvador did it, like I said, Russia did it, where they're like, hey, if you're like a high-level philosopher, business person, coder, engineer, we'll give you citizenship. Come here, right? And so what happens when you get a country that is purposely trying to steal and hold you down or back or whatever it is that you don't like about it, and then you have another country over here that's trying to attract the very best people, and so then it creates this power dynamic or a competition dynamic, and so whether people want to admit it or not, we're all competitive people. Investors are competitive, hedge funds are competitive, businesses are competitive, and so are nation states as well. And so what happens when I can just pack up from whatever country I'm in the U.S. and go to another country that I want to go into? Now, in the old days, back to the industrial age, I can't just move my factory.
Yeah.
Right? I can't just move my apartment downtown. And in a lot of cases, some of my best friends growing up were from South Africa. And when they fled South Africa, they couldn't even get their money out of the banks. Crypto ran, I did a show with him, and he was talking about how his family, when they fled to South Africa. His father had melted down all their gold and had put it all into like one big container, like a barrel. And when they showed up to the plane to be evacuated out, I think they were evacuating out of Iran. You can fact check me on that, but they were evacuating out, and he showed up with the gold, and they're like, hey, you can't take that with you. And he's like, what do you mean? It's our life savings. And he said, well, you either stay here with it or you leave it. And they left it, and he said they had to live in tents for 3 years.
Oh my God,
right?
that's terrible.
And so anyway, I can't take my gold, I can't take my factory, I can't take my real estate. But in a world where I can transport my energy anywhere I want, then it really starts to accelerate the game theory, if you will. And so maybe there's some people that agree with you and are like, nope, I'm just not going to do it. And if you want to put me in jail, then so be it. There's too many of us, you can't do it to all of us. And some people are just like, well, I'll just go where I'm treated best.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's another way to affect that. I think we can see that.
Yeah, it's a blend for sure. Like you can take whatever tactic you want, but I think at the end of the day, this technology allows a mass exodus of people to do that, right? Because if they can't control the people anymore, and people start doing this at scale, they're gonna have to do what you just said. They're gonna have to then compete to get these people back.
Right.
But like, one has to come before the other, right? Like you're not just going to comply your way and be like, oh, like we're going to come and compete for you to stay here. Please don't go. There has to be some kind of actual, separation from, I believe, this, current situation.
Yeah. In regards to your statement you made about the government not really needing our taxes and not going to our own personal goods, so to speak. In 2023, the government collected $2.18 trillion of income taxes. Year to date, 2024, the government has already spent more than $2 trillion that they brought in. So basically, to kind of add on to your point, the amount of income tax they receive, they've already spent more than that in debt this year. And so, do they need our income? I put something on Twitter the other day talking about how really taxes and the talk that I gave in Australia was about how the game is rigged, the game of money, and it's rigged so we stay in the game. And so taxes take half our wealth. Whatever wealth we manage to keep after that gets eroded by inflation. Yep. And then whatever money we have after that, maybe we put into Wall Street, and they siphon off the rest, right? And so it's sort of that game. But yeah, so they don't really need it. Now, I mean, it's a super interesting concept. I love the idea of the sovereign individual and being able to move. I'm more about competition than just outright revolutionary. But either way, it's a revolution. And when we think about how technology changes the world, it changes the balance of power. So at the intro, I referenced about 500 years ago was the Protestant Reformation, which is really technology, the printing press, which released information. But really, there was something else that was going on at the same time, too, and that was the gunpowder revolution. Yeah. And so the gunpowder revolution then also changed the balance of power, right? Where you had a knight who could fight off 100 peasants or serfs from a horse. All of a sudden, now one peasant or serf could have a gun and take out 100 knights. And so that's also sort of what I think is happening, where it's changing the balance of power, because to the point I think that you're making is these governments have had complete control and monopoly over money. So they have all the power, and it's all in their system. So like Russia found out the hard way that they could just lose all their money at one time. But when I can hold my wealth in a way they can't just confiscate and steal at the click of a button. There's the wrench attack or whatever, but then it changes the balance of power. And when it changes the balance of power, then what starts to happen?
Well, let's go back to gunpowder, right? How long was gunpowder around before people actually realized it could be used in war or as a weapon, right? It was used for medicine, it was used for all these different things. But it took I think a few hundred years for people to actually realize they could use gunpowder to project power, right? Inflict major damage upon their enemy. And I like to look at Bitcoin from a military perspective. I was never in the service, right? I'm a big proponent of software, Jason Lord's software. So I like to literally think of Bitcoin as a weapon, as the perfect weapon for humanity. Because if you think in military tactics, right? By the way, all of our military aren't bad people. We know there's a military industrial complex, but we also know there's some very smart, bright individuals that are patriots that are in our military that are literally helping us.
I was born into an Air Force family. So my father's a vet, my father-in-law is a vet, my grandfathers were vets, so certainly not.
Right. And so we have absolute patriots that want what's best. They don't like seeing their sons and daughters going off to war, to fight wars in other countries that, we can't even point to on a map. And so how was the military going to change itself to possibly maneuver, right? Because this is kind of maneuver warfare, to give the people a battlefield to where they could invite the fight, right? Like a lot of us are inviting the fight. Like, come on, you want to fight us on our territory? Come on and try to fight us on our territory, right? Like you're going to have to buy Bitcoin. You're going to have to actually back at the dollar with it. You're going to actually force incentives upon your own infrastructure. Like every scenario in that case actually leads to them losing at the end of the day. And so back to what this means, right? In warfare tactics, you have a population, right, that has been kind of it's been domesticated for a very, very long time. We're like petulant children that when we get upset at something, we'll go rant about it online. We'll yell and scream, oh my God, they did this and that. And then what do? Next day you go back down, you forget about it, you watch football, you're drinking beers and you're like, oh, I got to pay this tax. I'm just paying it. There's nothing I can do. Okay. And what this is like a call of the alpha. It's like a wake up of alpha DNA. Like, hey, these people are going to come and kill you. They're going to come and steal all of your energy. But there is this technology over here that you as the individual can pick up, store your own wealth, self-custodial Bitcoin, and you can just opt out. You can still continue to watch your football, drink beers, but you can literally arm yourself as a digital citizen, as a digital sovereign in cyberspace to where you no longer allow that enemy to continually exploit you, right? Because they're exploiting you at every level through permissioned certificates, licenses, taxation. I mean, every level. What don't you need a permission for these days? Yeah. And if we keep pulling those threads, we get to fifth generation warfare. Okay, which was a doctrine put out by the military, 20 or so years ago that talked about non-kinetic ways to project power, right? Peaceful ways to shift the legitimacy of the current perception, okay, of the populace, okay? And so that's
psychological warfare.
Psychological warfare, right? Psyops, right?
So Gen 1 was mano y mano. I'll fight you, you fight me. Gen 2 was organized militaries. My military fight your military, right? Third gen warfare was, if I get this right, correct me if I'm wrong, third gen was like industrialized warfare, so carriers, ships, planes, World War I, World War II. Gen 4 warfare was then like guerrilla warfare, and I think
like maneuver warfare,
and terrorism, right? Yeah. And then fifth gen is what you're talking about now. Interesting tidbit about that is the U.S. has never won a war since fourth generation on, right? So we won obviously in third generation, but we haven't been able to win in fourth. The interesting thing about the fourth generation warfare being like guerrilla warfare, terrorism sort of thing is that there's really no way to win that, because in terrorism it's an ideology and not an organized army. So like there's no head of the snake to cut off, so to speak, right? Each of these cells sort of like operate independently but on a shared ideology. And then anyway, so now going into fifth generation warfare, now it's really about psychological warfare. The way I had it explained to me was like, you can feel the pressure and the attack, but you're not sure where it's coming from. So it's not just psychological warfare, but it's
disinformation.
It's disinformation.
Yeah, and you can't tell what's real. And so what's funny now, I think, is that the conspiracy theorists of old, right, are kind of like the new conspiracy theorists, or like it's been flipped, right? So I think now we see people walking around with masks and they look like complete lunatics, right? Because we were all the ones about talking about, hey, the Federal Reserve is corrupt, like there's a military industrial complex, 9/11, JFK assassination. We're all the crazy conspiracy theorists. But now we've kind of flipped those conspiracies on their head to where a lot of this seems to be true. We got multiple Trump shooters. We have, these false flag bombing events that happen. We had the pullout of Afghanistan. You've got, the pandemic, and then you have people now that are like walking around. And so the psyops work on both sides. And so the entire world basically shut down for a pandemic. And what happened, right? Did they have military guys at everybody's house forcing you to do things? No, it was through the television, to where they warped everybody's mind. They mimetically like engineered people to be like, nope, this is what we have to do. This is what we have to do. And it was a very small minority that actually stood up to that. But on the opposite side of that, what it caused, I think, people to be like, whoa, this is levels that way too far. We've gone way too far over this stuff. And so I think that call the alpha is what's been awakened. But as part of that, when you mentioned the terrorism and that sort of thing, that's technically insurgency. Okay, so we actually label that stuff. We label it insurgency, and insurgency, defined by the CIA and some of the government documents, part of insurgency is actually shadow government. Okay, so to where the levers of power are not actually done by the politicians that we think we elect, but by some other more powerful individuals, like maybe banks or that sort of thing, to where the man behind the curtain, right, is actually pulling the levers of power, not the people that we entrust to this thing. And so where are you going with this, G? Where are you going with this? Well, funny enough, right, this is where we're going to get into counterinsurgency, okay? Because I look at our conflict that we're now in as sapiens, as humans. We're in this battle of insurgency versus counterinsurgency, okay? So insurgency, as we're talking about over here, is this shadow government, small group of people in power that are doing things like terrorism and stuff to instill fear, right, in each one of us.
Color revolution, psychological warfare.
Whether it's real or not, right? It's on the TV and it's there to make you scared. And then you have counterinsurgency. And what is counterinsurgency? Well, counterinsurgency is defined as a military and civilian effort taken to simultaneously defeat and contain insurgency and its root causes. Okay, military, civilian cooperation to actually defeat insurgency. Okay, and so really what we have is a battle of legitimacy. Okay, because the propaganda is trying to tell you this is legitimate, these people are in power, this is what's happening, right? And then we as a counterinsurgency be like, well, you're telling me all this stuff, but like in the real world, none of that matters to me or is actually happening in my world. Like that's not real.
Right.
And so you get disinformation versus what's real. And so we, right, as the counterinsurgents are that civilian uprising, the peaceful revolution to tell you, look, Bitcoin is legitimate. I can go to a computer screen and I can verify, how many blocks have been made, how many coins are on the network, where I can't verify anything on your network. Right. And so how am I supposed to legitimize your network when I can't verify anything? And so if you get to this legitimacy aspect, you get to consent. Okay, because if I don't consent to your abstract power, I am delegitimizing your power. Okay, and Americans, let's just say we were born and bred as insurrectionists from 1776, right? We have an absolute defiance to abstract power. We fought a revolution over it. It's in our DNA. It's literally in our blood. And so right now we're dealing with a dementia patient in the White House who is enacting things against the populace that are they real? Do you really have to comply? And I think that's why we need to stand up, and we have now a solution. We have a technology where we can collectively stand up. I can fight with someone in another country and we don't even have to know each other. And we're decentralized, we're in cyberspace. But guess what? If they go attack that individual, the entire network protects him and it protects me, right? I'm able to use the entire collective collaboration of the miners to protect each one of our energy that is encapsulated in this thermodynamically sound system. And so I just think it's fascinating because so many, I think, Bitcoiners or people looking to buy Bitcoin look at it from purely a way to hedge inflation, purely like a new stock or a new technology. When if I think you look at it from a military perspective, you look at it as a weapon, it actually empowers individuals to settle disputes, right? In a non-kinetic way, but also it allows you to project power. It allows you to say, you know what? I don't have to trust that you're going to like not tax me. I can just say no at the end of the day.
All right, now we're talking about Bitcoin and the future of the financial system. I want to make sure you secure it properly. Millions of Bitcoin have been lost. Myself personally has lost a lot of Bitcoin, maybe worth millions of dollars in today's dollars. And so I've learned the hard way that I want to secure it with a hardware wallet like this. Keep your private key safe. This is a Trezor hardware wallet. You plug it in, you do your transaction, and you unplug it. Don't leave it on an exchange. I've lost it that way. Don't leave your Bitcoin on a phone. I've lost it that way as well. Secure it with a hardware wallet like Trezor. I've used it for over a decade. I think it's the easiest one to use. It's open source hardware, so you don't have to worry about some backdoor and someone rug pulling you and taking your Bitcoin. That's why I like the Trezor, and it's pretty cheap. And if you'd like to save even more money, there's a link in the description down below that you can save some money with it. But look, whether you use a Trezor or not, use something. Don't leave your Bitcoin on the exchange or at risk of getting hacked off of your phone. Secure with a hardware wallet like this Trezor. There's a link down below. Now let's go back into the video.
I've always thought that maybe a better way to look at it was not as a weapon, but as a shield, which are not really the same. Maybe they are, and depends on how broad you want to have that definition. You would use a weapon like a sword and a shield together, but they're used for two different purposes. One's for protecting and one's offense, one's defense, so to speak. You can call them both weapons. Like I said, they're both used in warfare.
Active or passive, right? I mean, one is,
but I like to think of it more as protecting as opposed to, a defensive weapon as opposed to an offensive weapon, so to speak. But, one thing that I'm thinking as you're talking through that is that we're talking a lot about revolutions and wars and pushing back against, powers that get too big, so to speak. But when you think about, as I kind of framed out earlier with the gunpowder revolution, like sort of changing the balance of power. And you talked earlier about like a war and solving disputes, right? Like most wars have been fought over resources. Mm-hmm. So if I come and conquer you, I get your resources. I get your gold, I get your goats, I get your wheat or whatever it is. But when you have resources like Bitcoin that are digital, that can't be co-opted, you can kill me, but you can't take it, kind of a thing, right? Then what does that do to the incentive structure behind the war? Right, so it's like it doesn't take the place. I mean, we're always going to need oil, and we're still going to need to grow food. 100%. So it doesn't take the place of the need for the natural resources. But if the majority of the worth, so a lot of those natural resources have sort of been demonetized a little bit, right? Mm-hmm. Because maybe Bitcoin has built up valuation, and we don't really need that wealth. All the wealth is now digital. I mean, how does that change the incentive structures? And maybe it starts to shift the power balance here. And maybe there's not a need for all this insurgency, war kind of revolution talk.
Yeah, I mean, it changes incentives at the base level, right? Will the incentives change before, right? We get to a precipice for humanity to where, what if the perception of the upcoming election, right? What if the winner is not the actual perceived winner? Right? Like, what if something happens to where a majority think it was maybe rigged? I think that's a real concern that people should have, to where it's like, well, we've tried to play by the rules. We've done everything we can. We've played it out to the final degree. And then if we do, right, what talks about is insurgency, counterinsurgency, digital 1776, and they continually, right, are sending weapons to other countries to bomb other countries and destroy those countries, I think people need to have a morality line too. Like, if you are continually going to support the funding of terrorism abroad, I mean, technically that's what we do to some degree, then like you're aiding and abetting a criminal enterprise. Okay. And so if we're able to actually delegitimize their power, the Federal Reserve, right? If the bureaucracy in Washington is paid in an inferior currency, okay, the swamp drains itself, right? Like, imagine if you took the enemy's energy source away from them, which is the money printer, and they could no longer pay all these bureaucrats for every little pet project and war and propaganda arm that they wanted to do. Like, that's how you actually drain the swamp, because no one is going to, like, congressmen are going to have to learn how to code, right? Like, they're going to have to actually learn how to produce something of value to get value in return. No longer can they rent seek off of just taking from us. And I think what it does, it forces people to actually provide that proof of work. Like, you can no longer get the free ride, bro. So if you can no longer get a free ride, what does that mean for the congressman? What does that mean for the individual? But yeah, I don't know what that transition totally looks like. You know, it's still, I think there's still some cards to be played with the election and with what's going to happen with BRICS. There's so many different players on the board right now. It's an interesting time to be alive. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah. I want to ask you a couple more questions on the 5th generation warfare, and then I want to get into Satoshi Nakamoto, because I know you have some interesting thoughts there that you and I haven't had a chance to discuss. So I want to talk about Satoshi Nakamoto, and there was just that documentary that came out, I think, on HBO about that. I haven't got a chance to see it yet. But back to 5th generation warfare, psychological warfare, disinformation, if you will. I'm curious your thoughts on how do we, as individuals, as citizens, how do we navigate that and protect ourselves? Like the old world seemed like the problem was, how do I get the information? Today I have too much information, so the skill sets have most likely changed. But one thing that I've seen is like, it's cognitive dissonance. If I believe that to be true, everything else I know has to be false. And so I see seemingly maybe a mistake. A lot of people who, once they start to see these conspiracies being true, then everything's a conspiracy. And then they go too far the other way.
Right.
And there's certainly people on both sides of this, right? People that just believe everything on TV and people who think everything's a psyop. And usually it's probably something in the middle. So I'm curious kind of how you think through that. How do you protect yourself from that? How do you navigate that? How do you find truth and things like that?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually, because I've always wondered how I get to where I'm at certain points. And honestly, the best answer I have for that is have a lot of different people that have different opinions. Like, you don't always have to surround yourself with everybody that thinks the same way as you. So I have liberal friends, right? I have conservative friends. I have libertarian friends. I have military friends. And so I try to get all their perspectives, and I try to build my own mosaic based on intuition and based on what I think is best in the harmonics of natural law, right? Like, and I also try to take anything that any professional organization at some level and just completely ignore it. Like, take everything you've known and just try to ignore it and try to start fresh. And that's not really easy to do, but like, how many times have we heard, Mark, that eating red meat is bad for you, right? How many times have we heard that eating butter and salt is bad for you?
Right.
And that's like kind of like not true.
Yeah.
Low fat is good for you. No, fat is good for you, right? And
cholesterol. We need cholesterol.
We need cholesterol. And so, it's kind of a hard, but sometimes you just got to reset, and I've tried to reset. I've done things like fasting, doing things to where it's the old world stuff where they used to fast for a few days and then, eat raw food or that sort of thing. So I think, like, honestly, surrounding yourself with the most diverse group of friends you could find and then building your own mosaic inside of that, I think is probably the best way to do it. Because if you're surrounding yourself with just people that think the way you do, you're not going to ever see like what is on that other side and what are the knowledge you could gain. And so I think that's the biggest thing that people should do, is surround themselves with people that have different values and different opinions. And that way you can learn from them. Now, I'm not saying, if they're totally against your values, you should hang out with them, but like, have a diverse set of friends.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think I would add on to that, like, one, sort of understanding things at their base. So like first principles level. So if you can break that complex idea down to a first principles level, and then ultimately thinking through second, third, fourth, fifth order thinking. So welfare is great. We want to support these like single mothers working from home, these people that can't get jobs, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess that sounds like a pretty good idea, but then what? Well, then if we provide this net where people don't have to work, then people get lazy. And then what? Well, then they breed other generations who they know. And then what, right? And if you think through these things, second, third, fourth, I think you get to that as well. What about in misinformation, disinformation? I think many people are participating in that without knowing it. I get sent stuff all the time in my DMs. People forward me videos and reels and TikToks or whatever they are. And even people I know like send me stuff, and I'm like, I can't share that. I don't know if that's true or not.
Right.
And like, sometimes I'm like, well, let me do my own research into it, right? And so seemingly there's a lot of stuff that comes across that seems very real, but it's not. I'm just curious, sort of like your own personal philosophy on that. Like, do you just like, hey, this seems real to me based off of what I know, let me share this? Or do you like, let me do a little bit of research into this? Or kind of how do you think through that?
Yeah, I'm kind of like halfway. I try to take things that make sense. First of all, like common sense. Like, would this happen in a normal scenario, right? And so half of it, easily thrown away. Some it's like, you know what, that's interesting. I'll look at it a little bit deeper. Like I was at Las Vegas, right? I was in the Las Vegas shooting. My buddy got shot in the leg, right? But I knew the story they were telling was false. Like I knew there was there. I was there. I knew there wasn't one guy in a tower shooting at people. I knew there was something else going on, probably multiple shooters, right? And so I knew immediately that was fake, and what I experienced was real. And so in trying to decipher and discern what is real and what is not real, it's not easy. It's not easy at all. A lot of it comes from, like I like to talk about, mathematics. I try to bring everything back to mathematics, which is Bitcoin, right? Like if it passes the mathematical test of being true, then it's probably true, right? So like if Saylor says something or Trump says something, or, you know, I try to take it with a filter, being like, okay, this is a Bitcoin guy, this is a politician, look at it from their lens, who benefits if this comes true, who benefits if it doesn't come true. But I try to game it out. I try to Monte Carlo scenario everything. If it's important and I really want to be interested in it, I try to Monte Carlo scenario, like what are the benefits to me if I do, you know, promote this message, or the negative effects if it's not. Does it promote freedom? Does it promote you know, sovereignty? Does it promote good, or does it promote violence? If it promotes violence, it's put completely into the trash.
Yeah.
Okay. And so I think people need to have those basic filters up, because if it's promoting something that's too good to be true, if it's promoting violence, right? Those are things I think you need to immediately just dismiss and just move on to the next thing, because there are a lot of cults out there that will get you to do stupid things.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, I've been in this information for a long time, and trust me, it's
yeah, because it's a new war. It's fifth generational warfare, and it's being waged on us, the citizenry, and we're not equipped to handle that.
Well, and I think people need to understand what a bicameral vision of things are as well. Like certain things can be true and not true at the same time, but they can still lead you to a correct, like interpretation of what's happening, right? And I think you know, if you put those hats on of like thinking something can be right and wrong at the same time, but like understanding a bigger picture for something, is
that
also,
like it could be good and bad at the same time?
Yeah, like I mean, for instance, you take like like Trump. Okay, a lot of people don't like him. Some people like him. I'm a big Trump supporter myself, but a lot of people think like the election was rigged. Okay. And that, it probably was for some sense. In some sense, it maybe was. But at the other thing, like maybe he allowed it to happen, right? Maybe he allowed it to happen to expose corruption, okay? And so you can have a vision that says, yeah, well, maybe he didn't. Maybe part of that reasoning for it was to expose what's happening right now. Because had we not known of the level of corruption, had maybe he won again.
That's like 4D chess.
Yeah, 4D, 5D chess, right? Yeah. But at the same time, like it's still a bigger vision that allows you to be like, no, he's bad. He's part of the deep state. Like, and it's like, well, like let's put the
I see
common
that.
sense
Like I think about that. Like with like, I think about it like where things can be good and bad at the same time, and people can be good and bad at the same time. So Elon Musk, right? He's standing in the face of the world for an open platform to talk. But there's also a lot of things that he's done that also do scare me.
Yeah.
Milei down in Argentina, like he's seemingly done amazing things, and he seems to be pro-libertarian. And then, well, what about the ties to the Jew state or the WEF or whatever
Those are
it
great
is?
Examples. Yeah.
And it's like, well, that could both be true.
Correct.
Maybe he is part of those groups, whatever those groups you think is, and he's also doing good things there. Yeah. And maybe ultimately he does good things that end up being bad, and we'll figure that out when we get there. But like, I can just be happy to accept that. And that's one thing that I see a lot. We talked before we started recording, talking about old content I've done, talking about the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab and stuff like that, and how it attracts a certain amount of people, a certain type of people who have this victim mentality, and it's not really everybody's fault. Part of the fifth generational warfare is to demoralize people. So this has purposely been done to us to demoralize us and put us into that woe is me, why even try sort of attitude. But the problem that I see is that people have become so demoralized they can't take a win no matter what. And it was like and really this hit me across the eyes when Milei won in Argentina. And it was like, if he lost, it was like, oh, see, we're never going to win. They're never going to let us have it. But then he did win. And it's like, oh, he's a deep state. It's like, take a win, man. Like, so it's a new level of warfare that we just haven't been equipped for.
Yeah, and it's the same thing what happened with Saylor recently, right? Where he talks about being in bed with the banks and stuff, but also like self-custodial Bitcoin, and they all like jumped on him for that. And so, look, I think you need to understand the bigger picture of there are certain players that are moving humanity's Overton window towards peace, freedom, and sovereignty. And they still have to have one step in this old clown world to get us there, right? Like a Michael Saylor, like a Javier Milei, like a Donald Trump, like an Elon Musk, okay? To where they're doing things that on one level may seem, oh my God, like we're totally screwed. And then on the other hand, they're doing something that's totally, freedom, sovereignty, peace. And you're like, okay, well, like, how do I, discern
You can
that?
like this and not like that. And that's
Exactly.
okay.
But you can see a bigger vision, I think, moving forward. Like, what do we have now? We have completely decentralized internet and space.
Yeah.
Okay. And so is that a good thing or a bad thing? Probably a good thing, right? Yeah. He's putting microchips in people's brains.
I don't like that.
Maybe we don't like that, but he's also solving people that have
Although I've
chronic
been wanting
neck
to learn
and back
Spanish
pain.
forever. If they could just give me Spanish, man, I'd be so happy with that.
And so I look at it from those ways. And I also think like there's something very special about Elon, Tesla, and Trump. I think it should be noted that Trump's uncle was one of the first people that actually had access to Tesla's files back when he died back in New York when he was working on the Manhattan Project, right?
Not Tesla the automobile, Tesla the original inventor.
Nikola Tesla, correct.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, so John G. Trump, Trump's uncle, actually had first access to all of his files. He worked for MIT, worked for the FBI, and he was able to get all that information, whatever was there. And I think some of this Tesla technology is literally kind of this slow roll military Tesla technology that's kind of been hidden from us, And if we talk about like Bitcoin as this global energy system, right? Because Bitcoin is backed by energy, we're actually forcing the world to find the cheapest ways to produce power. Okay, and so if we continue down that thread of, hey, everybody in the world, like let's compete, who can find the cheapest way to like produce power? I think eventually we get to like this free energy, right? Because if everybody's doing it, and then we have this global currency that everybody wants, everybody's finding the cheapest way to, you figure out maybe cold fusion, maybe these different things, or bringing nuclear plants back online. At the end of that, like Jason Laurie said, you get like literally free energy after a hash war because everybody is going to want this very scarce digital asset that you can only get by plugging in real power to computers and making them run.
Yeah.
So there's a lot kind of baked into that, but I think, people need to look at more of this 40,000 foot view to where we can see the good people and bad people, but like at the end of the day, the good people are winning, I think is the bottom line there.
Let's jump into a final topic. I want to talk about Satoshi Nakamoto. So I know, like I said, I know you have some interesting ideas. We haven't really had a chance to talk about that or discuss it. Recently, there was a documentary that came out on HBO, and they unveiled who they thought it was. I forget exactly who they said it was.
Todd.
Peter Todd, yeah. I was interviewed for a documentary about Satoshi Nakamoto. I didn't have anything super interesting to say, more than anybody else has anything to say. I think it's a good thing that we don't know who Satoshi Nakamoto is, and I hope that we never do know for any number of reasons. But let's hear your theory. Maybe, have you seen the documentary, first of all?
Yeah, I did see the documentary.
Okay. So what are your thoughts on that? Do you agree with it, or do you still have your own thoughts?
Obviously, I think the documentary was most likely, a lot of, there were some good parts of it, like people that didn't know about Bitcoin. It was good for them to learn about it, but I think at the end of the day, it gave you a bad conclusion, right, of this random dude, Peter Todd. And funny enough, Mark, you know who the other documentary that gentleman did was? What was it about?
No.
It was about QAnon.
Oh, really?
It was. And it said, this documentary guy said, we found the entity known as Q, and like they were able to figure it out, which was also bullshit. And so, my kind of thesis on who or they Satoshi Nakamoto is like a good guy, military white hat operation, probably, that was somewhere inside the United States military. Okay. And I base that on the fact that, every piece of Bitcoin's architecture is US nuclear-proof military technology, GPS, right? Our entire global economy runs on GPS, okay? The timestamps are super important, not only for location, but to keep everything in sync, right? To keep our supply chains in sync, to keep cars on the road. All these different things are ran by GPS. We can do nothing without GPS. And GPS was initially put out as for nuclear weapons, okay? But that timing system has gone down to the commercial level to where everybody uses it every day. You've got SHA-256 created by the NSA. You've got Tor browser, which is actually created by the Navy to protect service members overseas. So if you think about miners in the early days, right? People may be scared of this network. They were totally anonymous. You didn't know where they were. So being hidden from a digital footprint was important. You also have TCP/IP, DARPA, right? The decentralized internet that if something got cut off, you could still communicate with each other. And so each piece of these is actually, military technology. And so when people say, oh, the CIA invented it, well, it's like, and the CIA is bad. Well, okay, yeah, well, prove it to me, right? Why would they produce something that is open source, that they don't have control over, that is completely permissionless? And you look at the architecture, you're like, well, that doesn't make any sense.
I've heard people say that, well, they created it just to get everybody into a CBDC. And it's like, well, they should have probably created something crappy.
Yeah, something different.
They should have created something bad and not something good,
Exactly. And so, and I also filter it into kind of the Q thing. Now, the Q thing is this group of whatever, these posts were made back in 2017. Okay. So these were randomized information posts. They were like a Socratic method of just dropping information. And what they did was they forced people to go out and research stuff. Like that's what I went out and started researching when Vegas happened. I was like, this is false, but this guy is at least saying something that makes sense. And so what I did was, well, what anybody could do is actually go look at them yourself, and you can prove mathematically that whoever this entity was, because nobody knows who it was still, the mathematical proofs inside the coincidences inside of those posts are mathematically impossible. Just like your chance at guessing a Bitcoin private key. And so what I think of Bitcoiners is like mathematical maxis. They know that like this is based upon math. And so if I can show you something that is literally mathematical proven, like you can't really deny it because the mathematics is what's important. And so if you kind of combine these two anonymous entities, right? One was kind of built more of like a decentralization of the media because 90% of our media complex was like owned by 6 different corporations who like literally spit the same message. This is dangerous to our democracy. I think everybody's heard that clip.
Right.
And so this actually forced individuals to go out and research a lot of these topics like Epstein Island, right? Like big pharma, like central bankers. And then those citizen journalists actually put out content on Twitter. I was part of a group that we had over 1 billion hits a month until we all got kicked off. And so we decentralized truth in a way that was not possible before because of the mainstream media. Memes are so important, right? Because they cut to the truth without having to explain it to someone, right? You see Hunter Biden with a crack pipe, like you don't have to know, like
the whole backstory.
You don't have to explain it behind that, right?
Yeah.
And so I think the military memetics, I think this information decentralization drop, and I think bringing in this new foundational currency are not a coincidence. And so, what does that mean? I don't really know. I just think that I know that there are possibly good guys behind the scenes. And if you go back to counterinsurgency, it talks about a military and a civilian alliance, right? The military is not just going to come in and like save everybody, like, oh, hey, we're going to come kick all the bad guys out. Here's your freedom back, right? But if you give the populace the tools to allow them to free themselves and maybe protect the back doors, like protect like civil war, protect full-on thermonuclear global worldwide war, right? Protect those like types of red lines to where we can like wake people up and kind of force them to the exit in a manageable way in a transition. I think it's absolutely clear that there is a plan behind some of this and that people need to actually learn about it and then take it by the bullhorns.
So if I'm trying to understand what you're saying here, you're saying that you think Satoshi Nakamoto could be somebody inside like a state actor who worked for maybe one of the intelligence agencies?
I think it could be just a couple of patriots, a group of patriots that put this plan together.
Like just citizens who want to remain anonymous?
I think it's more like deep inside our military. Like I think there's like groups of people inside of our military, inside of special forces, inside of there's a branch called the 780th Military Intelligence Branch. There's a couple different branches that are kind of interesting, but I'm not going to like say it's a specific person. Right. I just know that the intentions of the individuals that put this together were trying to usher in a new freedom for humanity, and it wasn't some random guy in his basement, right? Yeah. Like the technology that was the way it was built, you kind of passes that sniff test of being like, hey, like there was probably something more going on here.
Yeah. Yeah, I've often talked about when people say, oh, the government's going to make it illegal. And I'm like, the government, as if it's a monolith,
right.
As if it's not full of lots of different people with lots of different ideologies and stuff. And I believe there's tons of patriots that work inside the government.
Absolutely.
And there's plenty of people, certainly we know Elizabeth Warren and Gary Gensler would love to shut it down, but there's certainly other people like Patrick McHenry, the head of the Financial Services Committee, who runs the white paper in his office, right? And so I would imagine in the CIA or the NSA or whatever agency you want to think about, there's probably people who are oblivious to what they're doing. Some people probably know what they're doing, and then some people probably don't like it. They're the whistleblowers, if you will, and they maybe would be willing to leak some of that information. We have whistleblowers all the time. They're coming up more and more often, all being prosecuted, by the way. Obama promised to not prosecute whistleblowers, but they're all getting jail time now. But if you think about these whistleblowers, it's sort of like if you were in the NSA or CIA or whatever it is, maybe the whistleblower is like, hey, I can see what's happening. Here's a little bit of code. Yeah. And I'm going to leak this little bit of code just so that we can sort of have this life raft, backdoor, whatever, safety exit kind of a thing. Okay, it makes sense. I've often thought that makes sense, but yeah, it doesn't help identify who it is.
Yeah, and I think Trump was a big part of it as well to some degree. I think if you look back at his actions of Trump during his presidency.
With Bitcoin in 2009?
No, with Bitcoin, like just the frame that Trump was in during his tenure as president, like he knew about Bitcoin, and he is, I think, underhandedly a Bitcoin maximalist. He just hasn't really shown it yet. But he did things specifically to get us to where we're at today, like hiring Brian Brooks from as chairman of the OCC, right? Yeah. Instituting Bitcoin standard, going after Ripple. His SEC went after Ripple during the 2016 or whatever. Creating Space Force, right? That allowed us to actually build this other military branch in space, that protects the networks, that protects the ATMs, that protects GPS. And so there's a lot of things that I think he did that help us get to this point.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, we don't know who Satoshi is, and we'll probably never know, and I hope we don't. We're going to wrap it up with that. Garrett, GMONEY, host of the Rugpull Radio. Tell us about Rugpull Radio and how else people should catch up with you.
Yeah, great. So Rugpull Radio, we're on Rumble every Thursday night at 10:30 p.m. Eastern. We combine a lot of these topics of Bitcoin, Q, Trump, Pepe the Frog. We get into like some conspiracy theories, but we're a Bitcoin show. We're just a couple of guys talking about Bitcoin, what's happening in the news. And so we like to dig inside of these different rabbit holes to like see how far we can get and what we can expose. Also on Twitter or X as GMoney Pepe. And so Pepe the Frog is kind of a unique thing because of the memetics behind it. And I wrote this interesting paper called Covfefe that actually talks about how maybe some of the numerology actually ties into a lot of the Bitcoin protocol and part of this plan. So it's kind of a fun rabbit hole if you're interested.
Cool. We'll put all those links in the show notes down below, and let's wrap it up. Thanks, Garrett.
Cool. Thanks, Mark.